high above the turquoise shimmer of the Adriatic Sea, where jagged limestone peaks rise like the broken teeth of a sleeping giant. There once existed a republic unlike any other in Europe. This was Poljica, a rugged pocket of Croatian land carved between the Cetina River and the Dalmatian coast, where stone villages clung to the mountainside and the echoes of church bells mingled with the whispers of rebellion. Long before the modern age of democracy, while kings and emperors ruled with iron fists, the people of Poljica dared to imagine a world where power belonged to them. The year was the late 1400s. Europe was a chessboard of clashing empires. The Ottoman Turks pushing relentlessly westward, the Venetian Republic tightening its grip along the Adriatic, and the Habsburgs consolidating their might in the north. In this age of feudal lords and endless wars, freedom was a luxury few could even dream of. Yet, in the hidden folds of Croatia's Dalmatian hinterland, the villagers of Poljica quietly built something extraordinary, a mountain democracy where farmers, shepherds, and fishermen shaped their own destiny. Life in Poljica was as harsh as the craggy cliffs that surrounded it. Winters bit with icy winds sweeping down from the Dinaric Alps, and summers scorched the limestone fields. But these same unforgiving mountains offered a gift: natural protection. Invaders found the narrow passes treacherous, the ridges impossible to cross without alerting watchful sentinels. While the great powers of Europe spilled rivers of blood to control fertile plains and trade routes, Poljica's people thrived in their difficult refuge. Here, independence was not granted, it was defended every single day. At the heart of this republic was a remarkable charter known as the Poljica Statute, a document first recorded in 1440, though its customs likely stretched back centuries. Unlike the rigid hierarchies of neighboring states, the statute outlined a system where villagers elected their leaders, settled disputes through councils, and shared responsibilities for defense and justice. Each year, representatives of the 12 clans of Poljica gathered to choose a duke, a leader whose power lasted only as long as the people's trust. If he failed them, he was replaced. No king, no emperor, no distant lord could overrule the will of the mountain assembly. Imagine the scene. Men wrapped in coarse woolen cloaks and leather boots, standing beneath ancient oak trees or within the shadow of a stone church, raising their hands to vote while women and children watched from the edges. In a time when most of Europe's peasants lived under crushing feudal obligations, the people of Poljica owned their land, chose their laws, and defended their freedom with their lives. But freedom always has a price. Poljica stood at the crossroads of ambition. To the west, the mighty Venetian Republic coveted the Adriatic coastline and sought to bring every village under its mercantile empire. To the east, the Ottoman Turks advanced with terrifying speed, swallowing the Balkans with armies that seemed unstoppable. To the north, the Habsburgs watched and waited, ready to exploit any weakness. Each of these powers looked upon Poljica's independence with a mix of irritation and envy. How could a tiny mountain republic defy them all? The answer lay in a delicate dance of diplomacy, espionage, and sheer resilience. The leaders of Poljica were masters of playing empires against each other. When Venetian merchants demanded taxes, Poljica offered trade concessions. When Ottoman pashas threatened invasion, they promised neutrality and tribute, all while secretly aiding Christian forces. Their survival depended not on brute force but on strategic ambiguity, the art of making every empire believe Poljica might side with them tomorrow. Yet beneath this careful diplomacy beat the fiery heart of a people ready to fight. Every man in Poljica was expected to bear arms, and their mountain terrain turned them into natural guerrilla warriors. Their reputation spread across the Adriatic. Ambushes from the cliffs, lightning raids on enemy camps, and the uncanny ability to disappear into the rocks like ghosts. Venetian records speak of patrols vanishing into narrow gorges, only to be struck by arrows from invisible bowmen. Ottoman commanders cursed the mountain devils, who seemed to defy even the fiercest janissaries. Legends grew around their defiance. Stories tell of midnight councils where villagers plotted strategies under a sky blazing with stars, and of women carrying coded messages through hidden mountain paths. Children were taught from birth that freedom was not merely a right but a duty, etched into every stone of their homeland. The very geography of Poljica became part of their identity. The Cetina River, a silver blade cutting through the land. The Moser mountain range, a fortress of nature. The Adriatic breeze carrying both the scent of salt and the promise of danger. Still, the Republic was no utopia. Internal rivalries sometimes flared, and the constant pressure of outside forces meant uneasy compromises. Tribute payments to the Ottomans strained resources. Venetian spies infiltrated village councils. Disputes over grazing lands or trade rights occasionally led to blood feuds. Yet, compared to the rigid monarchies of Europe, Poljica's system offered something radical. A voice for ordinary people, a chance to shape the destiny of their community. By the 16th century, as the Ottoman threat loomed larger and Venetian ships patrolled the coast, Poljica became a symbol of stubborn independence. Travelers from across Europe marveled at this little republic of peasants that managed to remain free while greater kingdoms fell. Chroniclers compared it to the Swiss cantons or the ancient Greek city-states, a living reminder that democracy could flourish even in the harshest of landscapes. But shadows gathered on the horizon. Empires that once tolerated Poljica's autonomy grew impatient. Venice tightened its trade restrictions. The Ottomans demanded heavier tributes. The Habsburgs began plotting their own expansion into Dalmatia. Whispers of betrayal and secret alliances spread through the mountain villages. Could the fragile balance that had protected Poljica for centuries finally collapse? As night settled over the Cetina Valley and the stars glittered like shards of cold steel, the people of Poljica prepared for whatever came next. Their freedom had been carved from rock and defended with blood. And though empires might rise and fall, the mountain republic stood as proof that even the smallest community, hidden away from the world, could dream of democracy and dare to live it. The next chapter of Poljica's story would be written in both ink and iron, in treaties signed under candlelight and battles fought under the scorching sun. The question was not whether they would fight for their freedom, only how long the mountains could shield them from the storms to come. The Republic of Poljica entered the 16th century as a paradox. Small in size, yet large in reputation. Humble in appearance, yet feared by powerful neighbors. Surrounded by empires that demanded submission, the Mountain Republic practiced a form of diplomacy that was as daring as it was brilliant. While other states built armies of conquest, Poljica built networks of agreements, alliances, and calculated betrayals, walking a razor's edge between survival and annihilation. The Venetians were among the first to recognize Poljica's unique value. Venice ruled the Adriatic Sea like an emerald kingdom, its galleys patrolling the coastline and its merchants controlling trade from Dalmatia to the Levant. To the Doge and his council, Poljica was both a nuisance and a potential asset. The mountain passes controlled by the Republic were gateways to inland Croatia and Bosnia, key routes for the movement of soldiers and goods. Venetian traders needed these roads, yet they resented the Republic's independence and its refusal to pay taxes to the Serenissima. In the Grand Council chambers of Venice, debates raged over how to handle this tiny, stubborn republic. Should they send soldiers to crush it? Offer trade deals to lure it into submission? Venetian diplomats were dispatched to Poljica's mountain assemblies, carrying gifts of salt, grain, and fine fabrics, symbols of wealth meant to entice the villagers. But the people of Poljica were not easily seduced. They negotiated fiercely, agreeing to limited trade concessions while refusing any clause that compromised their freedom. Time and again, Venice left the mountains empty-handed, forced to accept Poljica's terms simply to keep their trade routes open. To the east, the Ottoman Empire loomed like a gathering storm. By the mid-1500s, Ottoman forces had conquered much of the Balkans, their banners bearing the crescent moon fluttering across fortresses from Serbia to Greece. The fall of Bosnia brought the Turkish frontier to Poljica's doorstep, and with it, a terrifying question. Would the Republic fight, submit, or vanish into history? The Mountain Council's answer was both pragmatic and cunning. They offered the Sultan tribute, a yearly payment of gold and goods, in exchange for autonomy. This arrangement allowed Poljica to remain officially neutral, a tiny buffer zone between Ottoman territories and Venetian possessions. To the Ottomans, the tribute was a small price for stability. To Poljica, it was a shield bought with coin instead of blood. Yet behind the scenes, Poljica's leaders secretly aided Christian resistance movements, passing intelligence to Venetian captains and harboring fugitives fleeing Ottoman rule. This double game required nerves of steel. Ottoman envoys frequently visited Poljica to inspect the Republic's defenses and collect the tribute. Their eyes were sharp, their tempers unpredictable. A single misstep, a late payment, a careless remark could trigger invasion. Villagers spoke in whispers when Ottoman delegations passed through, their children instructed never to speak of hidden weapons or secret alliances. Every meeting with the Sultan's men was a performance of humble loyalty, concealing the defiance that burned beneath the surface. To the north, the Habsburgs added yet another layer of danger. The powerful dynasty, ruling Austria and much of Central Europe, sought to expand their influence in the Adriatic. They watched Poljica with growing interest, seeing in its strategic passes a potential foothold against both Venice and the Ottomans. Habsburg envoys arrived with promises of protection and offers of military alliances. But the people of Poljica knew the cost of such deals. Once the Habsburgs planted their banners, they rarely left. The Republic's survival depended on maintaining perfect balance. Too much favor to Venice, and the Ottomans would attack. Too much tribute to the Ottomans, and the Venetians would retaliate. Any sign of weakness could invite Habsburg intervention. In this treacherous game, the Poljica Council used every tool at their disposal. Secret messengers, coded letters hidden in barrels of olive oil, and mountain scouts who reported troop movements along the Cetina Valley. Their ability to anticipate imperial moves was legendary. Venetian records describe Poljica as a republic of ghosts, always one step ahead, impossible to trap. Yet diplomacy alone could not guarantee safety. The people of Poljica understood that every man was a soldier, and every village a fortress. Children were trained from an early age to navigate the mountains in silence, to recognize the call of a falcon as a warning signal, to carry messages through hidden ravines without leaving a trace. Women maintained secret caches of food and weapons, ready to supply fighters at a moment's notice. When Ottoman raiders tested the Republic's defenses, they often found empty villages, only to be ambushed from cliffs where sharpshooters lay in wait. The terrain itself became an ally. Narrow goat paths turned into deadly choke points. Dense pine forests provided cover for ambushes. The Cetina River, with its roaring rapids, served as both barrier and escape route. Venetian commanders complained that even when they captured a Poljica fighter, they rarely gained useful intelligence. The mountains speak more than their prisoners, one captain wrote bitterly. Despite the constant threat of war, the people of Poljica cultivated a vibrant culture. Their mountain assemblies were not only political gatherings but also festivals of identity. Music echoed across the ridges as villagers danced to the rhythms of ancient folk songs. Epic poems celebrated legendary heroes who had outwitted imperial armies. The Poljica statute was read aloud to remind everyone, young and old, of the rights and responsibilities that bound them together. Freedom was not merely an idea. It was a living tradition renewed with every generation. Still, cracks began to appear. Tribute payments to the Ottomans grew heavier, draining resources. Trade with Venice brought wealth but also jealousy and internal disputes. Some families argued for closer ties with the Habsburgs, believing imperial protection was the only way to preserve their independence. Others warned that any alliance would be the death of their republic. Heated debates in the mountain councils sometimes lasted for days, voices rising like the winds that swept across the Moser peaks. Tensions came to a head when Ottoman forces, frustrated by Poljica's secret support of Christian rebels, launched a punitive expedition. Their soldiers advanced through the Cetina Valley, burning villages and seizing livestock. But the people of Poljica responded with characteristic cunning. They evacuated the lowlands, lured the invaders into narrow passes, and unleashed a devastating ambush. Ottoman survivors later reported being attacked by shadows that rained death from the rocks, a force that seemed to vanish into thin air after every strike. The victory was celebrated in song and story, but it came at a cost. Fields were scorched, families displaced, and tribute demands doubled. The Republic had survived yet another test, but the balance of power was shifting. Empires grew stronger, their armies larger, their ambitions more relentless. For all their courage and skill, the people of Poljica faced an undeniable truth. The world beyond the mountains was changing, and even the cleverest diplomacy might not hold it at bay forever. As night fell over the Cetina Gorge, the mountain councils lit their torches and gathered once again. The question on every lip was the same. How much longer could their fragile republic endure, caught between the ambitions of three mighty empires? The answers, whispered in the flickering firelight, were as uncertain as the winds that swept across the Adriatic. The 17th century brought a new era of turmoil to the Republic of Poljica. While the Ottomans tightened their grip on the Balkans and Venice strengthened its maritime empire, Poljica stood in the crosswinds of history, battered but not broken. The Republic's survival had always depended on clever diplomacy, but as wars flared across Europe, even the most brilliant negotiations could not shield it forever. Soon, the people of Poljica found themselves fighting not only with words, but with steel, shadows, and sheer defiance. The first great storm came during the Cretan War, 1645 to 1669, when Venice and the Ottoman Empire clashed over control of the eastern Mediterranean. Although Poljica officially claimed neutrality, neutrality was an illusion. Venetian agents pressured the Republic to supply intelligence and food to their garrisons along the Dalmatian coast. Ottoman envoys demanded tribute and threatened punishment for any sign of collaboration with Venice. Each messenger carried both gold and menace, forcing the Mountain Council to walk the narrowest of political tightropes. In the hidden valleys and stone villages of Poljica, these tensions erupted into a war of shadows. Venetian spies disguised as traders slipped into the mountain passes, leaving coded messages hidden in barrels of olive oil. Ottoman patrols prowled the forests, capturing villagers suspected of carrying secret dispatches. Yet time and again, Poljica's network of scouts and messengers outmaneuvered both sides. Boys barely into their teens memorized troop movements and raced across goat trails in the dead of night, guided only by starlight and the calls of owls. Women smuggled letters inside loaves of bread, their calm smiles concealing the dangerous cargo they carried. The Republic's militia perfected a style of warfare that would later be recognized as guerrilla tactics. Instead of facing imperial armies head-on, they struck where the enemy was weakest, ambushing supply convoys, sabotaging bridges, and vanishing into the mountains before reinforcements could arrive. Venetian commanders, frustrated by the elusiveness of their supposed allies, described Poljica's fighters as mountain foxes, untouchable and cunning. Ottoman officers fared no better, complaining that Poljica was a nest of spirits, impossible to capture or control. Every victory, however small, carried heavy costs. Ottoman reprisals were brutal. Villages suspected of aiding Venetian forces were burned, livestock seized, and elders executed as warnings to others. Children were sometimes taken as hostages, a cruel tactic meant to break the will of the Mountain Republic. But these acts of terror only hardened Poljica's resolve. In council meetings, leaders recited passages from the Statute of Poljica, reminding their people that freedom was not granted by kings or sultans. It was a birthright, defended by every able hand. The statute itself became a weapon of identity. Written centuries earlier, it outlined rights and duties with a clarity that astonished European scholars who later studied it. Land was shared collectively, leaders were elected by popular vote, and even the poorest farmer had a voice in the assembly. At a time when monarchs ruled by divine right, Poljica's democratic traditions were nothing short of revolutionary. Venetian and Ottoman envoys often left council meetings bewildered, unaccustomed to negotiating with peasants who debated like senators and voted like citizens. Despite the constant threat of invasion, daily life in Poljica pulsed with resilience. Shepherds tended their flocks on high pastures, listening for the distant echo of muskets. Farmers carved terraces into steep hillsides, coaxing olives and grapes from stubborn soil. At night, families gathered around hearth fires to sing epic songs of heroes who defied empires and outwitted generals. These ballads were more than entertainment. They were living history, a way to teach the next generation that courage and cunning could keep the Republic alive. One of the most celebrated legends from this period tells of Mara of Moser, a young woman who outwitted an Ottoman captain determined to capture her village. When soldiers approached under cover of darkness, Mara climbed a hidden ridge and lit multiple fires along the cliffs, making it appear that hundreds of fighters waited in ambush. The captain, convinced he faced a large militia, ordered a retreat. Her act of deception saved not only her village but also inspired songs that are still sung in Dalmatia today. Religious faith added another layer to the Republic's defiance. Catholic priests served not only as spiritual leaders but also as covert diplomats, carrying messages between Poljica, Venetian bishops, and distant allies. Chapels carved into mountain caves became secret meeting halls where prayers mixed with military strategy. Crosses were etched into cliff faces as silent symbols of endurance, visible to villagers but hidden from distant observers. The relentless wars of the 17th century gradually weakened all the great powers surrounding Poljica. Venetian galleys suffered defeats in the Aegean. Ottoman armies bled resources in endless campaigns. Habsburg forces struggled against uprisings across Central Europe. For a time, this chaos worked in Poljica's favor. Empires too busy fighting one another had little energy to crush a stubborn mountain republic. But this respite was temporary. Every victory, every treaty, every tribute payment was merely a pause in a larger struggle that would eventually resume. Inside the mountain councils, debates grew sharper. Some elders argued for deeper alliances with Venice, hoping the Maritime Republic's navy could shield Poljica from Ottoman revenge. Others feared Venetian domination as much as Turkish occupation, warning that Venetian protection often turned into permanent control. Younger warriors, emboldened by guerrilla successes, demanded more aggressive raids on Ottoman supply lines, while farmers pleaded for peace so they could plant their fields in safety. Through it all, Poljica's leaders clung to a single principle: never surrender the right to decide their own fate. Even when faced with overwhelming odds, the assemblies refused to place the Republic under Venetian or Ottoman sovereignty. Their decisions were sometimes contradictory, paying tribute one month, launching ambushes the next, but each choice was guided by the fierce conviction that freedom was worth every risk. By the end of the century, the Republic remained officially intact, a miracle in a region where small states were routinely swallowed by empires. Yet everyone sensed that the tide of history was rising. Gunpowder empires were becoming more organized, more centralized, and less tolerant of independent enclaves. The very mountains that had once sheltered Poljica now seemed less secure as artillery grew stronger and armies more mobile. Still, the people of Poljica refused to yield. As the 18th century approached, they prepared once again to face the storms ahead. Scouts sharpened their knowledge of hidden passes. Farmers stored grain in secret caves. Children learned the old songs of defiance, their voices carrying across the valleys like a promise. For more than 3 centuries, this tiny republic had defied kings, sultans, and doges. The question was no longer whether they were brave enough to continue, but how long the world would allow such a miracle of freedom to survive. As twilight settled over the Cetina Valley, the torches of the mountain assemblies burned bright against the gathering dark. Above them, the stars of the Adriatic sky shone like eternal witnesses, silently recording the vows of a people who refused to bow, even as the empires of Europe closed in from every side. The smoke from the Ottoman cannons still clung to the jagged limestone cliffs like a curse. By the mid-1500s, Klis had become more than a fortress. It was a symbol. Whoever held it controlled the narrow passage between the Dalmatian coast and the Croatian hinterlands, a gate through which armies, merchants, and dreams of empire all had to pass. For decades, the people of Klis had endured bombardment, starvation, and betrayal, but they also cultivated legends of defiance. Each wave of attackers, each treaty broken, added another layer to a story that was no longer just about walls of stone, but about the iron will of those who refused to surrender. As the Ottoman threat intensified, the defenders of Klis faced a cruel paradox. Their fortress was both their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. Its location high on a rocky ridge made it nearly impossible to storm, but it also meant supplies were agonizingly difficult to bring in. Food had to be hauled up narrow trails under the watch of enemy sharpshooters. Water cisterns, carefully guarded, became the lifeblood of the garrison. To conserve every drop, the soldiers learned to fight while parched, their throats dry as dust, their eyes burning from smoke and fatigue. Letters smuggled out of the fortress spoke of men boiling leather for broth, of mothers whispering prayers over empty pots, and of children who had never known a night without the sound of cannon fire. Inside the walls, leadership was both a privilege and a death sentence. Captains rose to power not by birthright, but by sheer endurance and the trust of their comrades. One of the most celebrated among them was Petar Kružić, a soldier of almost mythical reputation. Years earlier, Kružić had forged alliances with Venetian merchants, Habsburg envoys, and even rival Croatian nobles to keep the fortress supplied and manned. His daring raids across Ottoman lines, often carried out under moonlight, brought food, weapons, and morale back to Klis. He embodied the spirit of a borderland warrior, where diplomacy and brutality walked hand in hand. Even after his death in 1537, his name echoed through the halls like a rallying cry, a reminder that resistance was possible even against overwhelming odds. By the late 1530s, however, the Ottoman Empire was no longer content to merely harass the fortress. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, master of one of the most powerful empires in the world, saw Klis as the final piece in a puzzle that would secure his control over the Adriatic and threaten the very heart of Europe. He dispatched his most seasoned commanders to finish the job once and for all. Among them was Murat Beg Tardik, a Croatian renegade who had converted to Islam and risen through Ottoman ranks. His intimate knowledge of the fortress's defenses made him a particularly dangerous adversary. To the defenders, Tardik's name became a curse, a bitter reminder that loyalty could be bought and blood could betray. The siege that followed was a nightmare of attrition. Ottoman artillery pounded the walls day and night, shaking stones loose like teeth from a battered jaw. Smoke choked the narrow courtyards, turning daylight into a permanent twilight. Every breach repaired by the defenders was reopened by another barrage. The garrison's dwindling numbers fought with a ferocity born of desperation, hurling stones, boiling oil, and even burning pitch onto the attackers. Venetian spies reported that Ottoman trenches filled with the bodies of fallen soldiers, yet still the enemy advanced. For each janissary who fell, another seemed to appear, relentless and disciplined. Outside the fortress, the politics of Europe played their own deadly game. The Venetian Republic, eager to protect its trading routes but wary of direct confrontation with the Ottomans, offered token support, just enough to keep Klis alive without provoking a full-scale war. The Habsburgs, tied down by conflicts in the Holy Roman Empire, sent promises and prayers rather than reinforcements. Klis, once a coveted stronghold, became a pawn in a wider geopolitical struggle where treaties were written in ink but enforced in blood. For the defenders, these distant maneuvers meant little. They were left to face the full fury of the Ottoman war machine with only their own courage to sustain them. The final days of the siege were a descent into chaos. Rations had long since run out. Ammunition was so scarce that soldiers scavenged spent enemy arrows to reuse them. Disease spread through the cramped quarters, claiming as many lives as enemy blades. Still, the defenders refused to surrender. Chronicles tell of women carrying stones to the battlements, of priests blessing cannons before each volley, and of children acting as messengers between towers under fire. Every act of resistance, no matter how small, became a declaration of existence. We are still here, yet even legends have limits. In March 1537, after months of relentless assault, the fortress finally fell. The defenders, weakened by starvation and betrayed by false promises of relief, were overwhelmed. Some were killed in the final onslaught. Others were captured and sold into slavery. Petar Kružić's earlier victories could not shield Klis from the brutal arithmetic of war. For the Ottoman Empire, the capture of Klis was a triumph, a strategic gateway secured and a symbol of Christian resistance crushed. But even in victory, the price was steep. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers lay dead in the rocky ravines below the fortress, their graves a silent testimony to the ferocity of the defenders. The aftermath was as complex as the siege itself. The Ottomans fortified Klis, using it as a base for further incursions into Dalmatia. Muslim settlers moved in, altering the cultural fabric of the region. Yet the spirit of resistance did not die. Bands of Uskiks, Croatian guerrilla fighters, launched daring raids from the surrounding mountains, harassing Ottoman patrols and disrupting supply lines. Their exploits kept the dream of liberation alive and ensured that the story of Klis remained one of defiance rather than defeat. Over time, the fortress would change hands again, passing between Ottomans, Venetians, and Habsburgs like a blood-stained prize. Each transition added another layer to its legend, each scar another reminder of the price of strategic importance. For the people of Croatia, the fall of Klis was not the end but a beginning. It hardened their resolve and shaped their national identity, weaving the siege into the fabric of folklore and collective memory. Songs were sung of Krušika's bravery, poems written of mothers who buried their sons beneath the fortress walls, and prayers whispered for those who never returned. Even centuries later, when the Ottoman threat had receded and the fortress stood as a weathered ruin, travelers could still hear echoes of the struggle in the howling wind and the creak of ancient gates. Today, the scars of the siege remain etched into the stones of Klis. Visitors walking its ramparts can still see the blackened marks of cannon fire, the jagged edges of hastily repaired breaches, and the narrow stairways where defenders once made their last stands. Guides recount tales of heroism and betrayal, of battles fought with swords and words alike. The fortress, now a silent sentinel overlooking the modern city of Split, serves as both a monument to the brutality of empire and a testament to the endurance of those who dared to resist it. As twilight settles over the Dalmatian coast, the view from Klis remains breathtaking. Red-tiled roofs stretching to the Adriatic, mountains rising behind in solemn grandeur. It is easy to imagine the ghosts of soldiers and civilians alike, their whispers carried on the evening breeze. They speak not only of loss and suffering but of a deeper truth, that even in the face of overwhelming power, the human spirit can burn brighter than any cannon's flash. The siege of Klis may have ended in blood and iron, but its legacy is one of unbroken resolve, a story that continues to inspire all who stand where heroes once fought. When the smoke of battle finally cleared, Klis Fortress stood battered but not silent. Its walls bore the scars of relentless cannon fire, its courtyards were littered with the memories of defiance, and its name carried a weight that could not be erased by conquest. The Ottomans may have claimed the stones, but the spirit of Klis belonged to no empire. What followed the siege was not merely an occupation. It was the transformation of a fortress into a symbol, a place where blood and iron had forged a legacy that would echo across centuries. The first years of Ottoman control were marked by swift consolidation. Engineers reinforced the damaged walls, expanding bastions and building new gun platforms to ensure that Klis would never again serve as a vulnerable frontier. Turkish garrisons patrolled the battlements, their banners bearing the crescent moon fluttering in the wind above the Adriatic. Mosques rose where chapels had once stood, the call to prayer blending with the cries of merchants in the marketplace. The fortress became an administrative hub, a launching point for Ottoman raids into the surrounding Dalmatian hinterlands and a bulwark against Venetian ambitions along the coast. But conquest did not bring quiet. The people of the surrounding villages, Croats, Dalmatians, and stubborn mountaineers, refused to accept foreign rule as destiny. From the rugged hills around Klis, bands of Uskiks emerged like ghosts of the old defenders. These irregular fighters, hardened by hunger and driven by vengeance, struck Ottoman patrols with lightning speed. They sabotaged supply lines, raided caravans, and disappeared into the karstic wilderness before the garrison could retaliate. Their tactics were as brutal as they were effective, turning every road into an ambush and every night into a test of endurance. To the Ottomans, they were rebels and thieves. To their fellow Croats, they were heroes keeping alive the flicker of independence. Meanwhile, the great powers of Europe continued their dangerous dance. Venice watched the situation with calculating eyes, balancing trade agreements with the Ottomans against the opportunity to reclaim lost territories. The Habsburgs, locked in their own struggles with Protestant reformers and rival princes, offered occasional support to the Uskiks, using them as pawns in a wider game of imperial rivalry. Klis became a stage where empires played out their ambitions through spies, smugglers, and mercenaries. Letters intercepted by Ottoman officials revealed Venetian agents bribing guards, Habsburg officers funding covert raids, and priests smuggling intelligence disguised as prayers. The fortress, once a single-minded military objective, had become a nest of intrigue. For the local population, life under Ottoman administration was a mixture of harsh realities and unexpected accommodations. Taxes were heavy, but trade flourished. Muslim, Christian, and Jewish merchants jostled for space in the markets that sprang up at the foot of the fortress. Travelers from distant corners of the empire, Armenian traders, Bosnian craftsmen, Albanian soldiers, passed through Klis, adding new languages and customs to the already complex tapestry of Dalmatia. Some Croats converted to Islam to escape taxation or gain favor, while others clung fiercely to their faith, worshipping in secret when churches were confiscated. Over time, families learned to survive by adapting, blending old traditions with the demands of a new order. Yet the memory of resistance never faded. Songs were sung in hidden taverns of Petar Kruzic's daring raids and of mothers who carried stones to the battlements during the siege. Children learned the names of fallen heroes alongside their prayers. Even Ottoman officials recognized the power of these stories. They tried to suppress them, but each attempt only deepened the legend. Travelers from Venice and Vienna reported hearing ballads of Klis performed in remote mountain villages, where elders told wide-eyed youngsters of nights when the sky glowed red from cannon fire and the mountains themselves seemed to roar with defiance. Decades passed, but the fortress remained a flashpoint. In 1596, an uprising led by Christian rebels briefly threatened to reclaim Klis. Armed with Habsburg support and fueled by dreams of liberation, the rebels stormed the fortress in a daring nighttime assault. For a few fleeting days, the Croatian flag flew once again over the ancient walls. Bells rang in nearby villages, and prayers of gratitude filled the air. But the Ottomans responded with overwhelming force. Reinforcements from Bosnia and Herzegovina poured into the region, crushing the rebellion and retaking Klis. The victory was decisive, but it came at a cost. The uprising revealed how fragile Ottoman control remained and how fiercely the local population clung to their hope for freedom. By the early 17th century, the balance of power in the Mediterranean began to shift. Venice, alarmed by Ottoman expansion and emboldened by Habsburg alliances, launched new campaigns across Dalmatia. The fortress of Klis, once a jewel of Ottoman conquest, now became a liability. Venetian fleets blockaded coastal supply routes while Habsburg troops advanced through the hinterlands. In 1648, during the long and bloody Cretan War, the Venetians finally captured Klis. Their victory was celebrated across Europe as a triumph of Christian arms over the Ottoman Crescent. Cannons fired from the walls of Split, and church bells rang for days as the fortress changed hands once again. Venetian rule brought its own transformations. The crescent flags were torn down, replaced by the winged lion of St. Mark. Churches were restored, mosques converted, and the fortress refortified to guard against Ottoman counterattacks. Venetian administrators encouraged settlers from the hinterlands to repopulate the area, offering tax breaks to those willing to rebuild the war-torn villages. For the people of Klis, Venetian control was both a relief and a reminder of how little their fate was their own. They traded one empire for another, their lives still shaped by decisions made in distant capitals. Through it all, Klis remained a living monument to the resilience of its defenders. Travelers from across Europe came to marvel at its position, perched like a hawk on the limestone ridge, commanding a sweeping view of the Adriatic Sea and the fertile plains beyond. Chroniclers described the fortress as a stone crown on the mountains, a place where history seemed to linger in the very air. Artists sketched its jagged silhouette against crimson sunsets, while poets compared its enduring walls to the unyielding spirit of the Croatian people. Each visitor carried the story of Klis farther afield, ensuring that its legacy would outlast even the mightiest empire. In the centuries that followed, Klis would see many more flags fly above its ramparts. After Venice came the Habsburgs, and later the forces of Napoleon, each leaving their own marks on the fortress. Yet the essence of Klis remained unchanged. It was not merely a military outpost, nor simply a relic of medieval warfare. It was a witness, a silent observer of the tides of history, of battles fought and lives lost, of treaties signed and broken. Its stones absorbed the echoes of cannon fire, the chants of prayers, the cries of the wounded, and the whispers of conspirators plotting in shadowed corners. Today, the fortress of Klis stands as both ruin and revelation. Visitors walk along its weathered battlements, tracing the outlines of old walls where defenders once braced against sieges. They gaze across the same vistas that inspired both conquerors and resistors, the sparkling Adriatic stretching to the horizon, the city of Split shimmering below. Guides recount tales of bravery and treachery, pointing to blackened stones where cannonballs once struck and to secret tunnels where uskuks once slipped through the night. Modern travelers bring cameras instead of swords, but they still feel the weight of history pressing against the limestone, as if the past might awaken at any moment. The story of Klis is more than a chronicle of warfare. It is a testament to endurance. It reminds us that fortresses are not just built of stone, but of the will to stand firm when the world trembles. Its sieges and conquests tell of the unrelenting struggle between empires, but also of the quiet strength of ordinary people who refuse to be forgotten. Each scar on its walls is a chapter, each echo in its halls a memory of those who lived, fought, and died so that their children might inherit not just a fortress, but a story worth remembering. As twilight descends over the Dalmatian coast, the fortress of Klis glows in the fading light, its silhouette sharp against the endless sky. The breeze carries whispers of battles long past, of heroes whose names still echo through Croatian folklore. Standing on its ramparts, one cannot help but feel the heartbeat of history. Steady, enduring, unbroken. Klis may have been shaped by blood and iron, but its true power lies in something far more enduring: the human spirit's refusal to yield.